My daughter told me, "You should be grateful I still answer your calls, Mom." So I stopped calling, and I transferred my grandson's school tuition directly to her name. A week later, my son-in-law calls me all sweet. "Hi, dear mother-in-law." But he had no idea what I was about to discover, and what I'd been planning for months. You know, they say revenge is a dish best served cold. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes the most devastating revenge comes from the person everyone thinks is harmless. For 40 years, I managed municipal library budgets. I controlled millions in public resources, tracked every penny, every allocation, every discrepancy. I could spot financial irregularities from a mile away. But somehow, my own daughter convinced everyone I was confused with numbers, that I needed help managing my own finances, that I should be grateful they were taking care of everything for me. What they didn't know is that librarians are very, very good at research. We're patient, we're methodical, and we never, ever give up until we find the truth. And when I finally started researching what they were really doing, well, let's just say their perfect little scheme had one fatal flaw. They underestimated a librarian. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been treated like you don't matter, if you've ever been underestimated because of your age or your gender, this story is for you. Because by the end, you'll understand why the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. And trust me, what I discovered about my own family, it's going to shock you. It started on a Tuesday morning in March. I remember because it was the day after my grandson Tommy's 8th birthday party. Sweet boy. All he wanted was for Grandma to be there. But according to my daughter Sarah, I was too confused to drive myself, and they were too busy to pick me up. Let me paint you a picture of my so-called confusion. I'd been living in the same house for 35 years. I drove the same route to the library every day for 4 decades without a single accident. I managed budgets that would make your head spin, tracked federal grants, and caught accounting errors that saved taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars. But suddenly, I was too confused to navigate 10 miles to my own grandson's birthday party. That Tuesday morning, I called Sarah. Simple grandmother questions. How was the party? Did Tommy like the gift I sent? Was he disappointed I couldn't make it? Her response still echoes in my mind. Mom, you should be grateful I still answer your calls. Do you know how exhausting it is dealing with your constant questions? We have our own lives. I sat there, holding the phone, feeling like I'd been slapped. This was my daughter, the little girl I'd raised alone after her father died when she was 12. The woman I'd put through college with my librarian salary, working double shifts at the reference desk. The person I'd trusted with my power of attorney when I had that minor gallbladder surgery last year. And she was treating me like a burden. But here's the thing about being a librarian for 40 years. You develop instincts. When someone's story doesn't add up, when the facts don't align, when there are gaps in the narrative, you notice. And something about Sarah's tone, about the way she said grateful, it felt rehearsed, calculated, like she'd been practicing that line. So I did something I'd never done before. I hung up on my own daughter, and I stopped calling. But I didn't stop thinking. You see, there was one detail that kept nagging at me. One financial thread that didn't quite fit their narrative of me being too confused to manage money. I was still paying my grandson's private school tuition. $800 a month automatically deducted from my account. Money I was happy to spend because education matters. But if I was such a burden, if my involvement was so exhausting, why was I still funding their choices? That's when I had my first truly devious thought. If they wanted to treat me like I didn't matter, they could handle their own responsibilities. I called Riverside Academy, where Tommy was enrolled. Mrs. Henderson in the billing office had always been sweet to me during school events. Mrs. Patterson, how lovely to hear from you. How can I help? I need to make a change to Tommy's tuition payments, I said, using my most professional librarian voice. Instead of the automatic deduction from my account, I'd like all future bills sent directly to his parents. Of course, let me just update that in our system. Should I send the bills to Sarah Patterson Williams at the Maple Street address? That's perfect. And Mrs. Henderson, could you make sure the change takes effect immediately? I want them to receive the next bill directly. Absolutely. Is there anything else I can help you with today? Actually, yes. Could you tell me when the next tuition payment is due? The spring semester bill goes out next week. It'll be $2,400 for the remaining 3 months. $2,400 in one bill that they weren't expecting. I thanked Mrs. Henderson and hung up with the first genuine smile I'd had in weeks. If Sarah found my calls exhausting, she was about to find my silence very expensive. But here's what I didn't expect. The call came exactly 7 days later. And it wasn't from Sarah. It was from Derek, my son-in-law. The man who, in 3 years of marriage to my daughter, had never called me anything warmer than Mrs. Patterson. Hi there, dear mother-in-law. His voice was honey-sweet, dripping with fake warmth. How are you doing? We've been thinking about you so much. Dear mother-in-law, the transformation was remarkable. I'm fine, Derek. What can I do for you? Well, we just got this bill from Tommy's school, and there seems to be some confusion. They're saying the tuition isn't being automatically paid anymore. I let the silence stretch. In my library days, I'd learned that silence makes people uncomfortable. Uncomfortable people say more than they intend to. Mom? Derek's voice had lost some of its sweetness. Are you there? I'm here. And yes, I transferred the tuition payments to you and Sarah. Since you're Tommy's parents, it makes sense for you to handle his expenses directly. More silence. Then, but Mom, we weren't expecting this expense right now. We've budgeted based on you covering Tommy's school. I understand. But since Sarah finds my involvement so exhausting, I thought it best to step back from financial decisions regarding Tommy. Mom, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Sarah loves hearing from you. We both do. You're such an important part of our family. The change in tone was remarkable. Suddenly I wasn't a burden. Suddenly I was important. Suddenly I was family. But you know what? It was too late for sweet words, because that phone call told me everything I needed to know. They needed my money more than they respected me. And if they were willing to lie about loving my calls just to keep my wallet open, what else were they lying about? That night, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and really thought about the past year. When had this narrative started? When had I become the confused mother who needed help with everything? And that's when I remembered. It all began after my surgery. I'd been nervous about managing my bills while recovering, so I'd given Sarah temporary power of attorney, just for a month, just to handle the basics while I healed. That was 8 months ago. 8 months. And somehow, temporary had become permanent. Somehow, helping with bills had become managing all finances. Somehow, I'd gone from independent woman to dependent burden without even noticing the transition. But here's what really bothered me. If they were just helping, why did I feel so isolated? Why was I living on what felt like an allowance from my own money? Why couldn't I see my own grandson without their permission? I walked to my desk and opened the drawer where I used to keep my financial documents. Empty. Everything had been organized and simplified for me. All my statements were going to Sarah's house. All my bills were being paid through her system. All my decisions were being filtered through her judgment. For my own good, of course. Because I was confused. Because I needed help. Because they cared about me so much. But if they cared so much, why did Derek's voice change so dramatically when money was involved? That's when my librarian instincts fully kicked in. Because if there's one thing librarians know how to do, it's research. We know how to find information that people don't want found. We know how to follow paper trails and connect dots and uncover truth. And I had a feeling that if I started digging into my own finances, I was going to find some very interesting information. But first, I needed to see exactly how much control they'd taken over my life. And I needed to understand why they were so desperate to keep that control. The hunt was about to begin. And they had no idea what they'd awakened. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I drove to my bank. Now, you might think that's a simple thing, but when you've been told repeatedly that you're confused and forgetful, When every financial decision has been filtered through someone else for 8 months, walking into that bank felt like an act of rebellion. First National, where I'd been a customer for 28 years. The same bank where I'd deposited my paychecks, where I'd gotten my mortgage, where I'd saved for Sarah's college education. I walked up to the customer service desk with my ID and my sweetest grandmother smile. The young man behind the desk, his name tag read Marcus, looked up with professional courtesy. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" "I'm hoping you can help me understand some transactions on my account," I said. "I'm a little confused about some of the recent activity." Marcus pulled up my account, and I watched his expression change slightly as he scrolled through the data. "Of course, Mrs. Patterson. What specific transactions are you asking about?" I pulled out a small notebook. Old librarian habits die hard, and showed him my handwritten list. "These transfers labeled family support. Could you tell me where that money went?" Marcus clicked through several screens, his brow furrowing slightly. "It looks like those transfers went to an account belonging to Sarah Patterson Williams. Is that your daughter?" "Yes, it is." "And these transfers labeled medical assistance?" "Same account." Click, click, click. "Actually, Mrs. Patterson, all of these transfers over the past 8 months have gone to the same destination. All of them. Every single emergency, every medical assistance, every home maintenance expense. All of it had gone straight to Sarah's account." "Marcus," I said, leaning forward slightly, "who authorized these transfers?" He clicked again, and I saw something flicker across his face. Concern, maybe, or recognition. "It shows here that Sarah Patterson Williams has power of attorney on your account. She's authorized to make transfers and payments on your behalf. Could you print me a complete record of all transfers made under that power of attorney? I'd like to review everything for my records." "Absolutely. Give me just a moment." While Marcus worked, I did some quick mental math. Just from what I could see on his screen, we were talking about thousands of dollars, maybe tens of thousands. "Mrs. Patterson?" Marcus handed me a thick stack of papers. "Here's everything from the past 12 months, and, well, I probably shouldn't say this, but you might want to review the terms of your power of attorney agreement. Sometimes people don't realize how broad those permissions can be." Smart young man. He was trying to tell me something without overstepping his professional boundaries. "Actually, Marcus, could you provide me with a copy of the power of attorney document on file?" "Of course. Let me get that for you." I sat in the bank lobby, reading through my own financial records like they belonged to a stranger. And in many ways, they did. Over the past 8 months, $47,000 had been transferred out of my accounts. $47,000. That's more than some people make in a year, and it had just disappeared. The transfers were labeled with vague descriptions: family support, $3,200, emergency fund, $1,800, medical assistance, $2,500, home maintenance, $4,100. But here's what didn't make sense. I hadn't had any medical emergencies. My house was in perfect condition. I'd had it inspected just last year. What family support? What emergencies? And the power of attorney document? It was supposed to be temporary, lasting only during my recovery period. It was supposed to cover only essential bills and medical expenses. And it was supposed to require my written consent for any transfer over $500. They'd been violating the terms of their own authority for months. I thanked Marcus and walked back to my car with a folder full of evidence. But evidence of what exactly? I knew money was missing. I knew Sarah was taking it. But I didn't know why, and I didn't know what she was doing with it. That's when I remembered something my old supervisor used to say. When you're missing information, look for the information that's missing. What wasn't I seeing? What weren't they telling me? What was happening in their lives that required $47,000 in emergency funds? I drove home and opened my laptop. Time for some digital detective work. Sarah's social media had always been private, but I was her mother. She'd accepted my friend request years ago and probably forgotten I could see her posts. I scrolled through months of photos and updates, and what I found made my blood boil. New furniture, expensive restaurants, a weekend trip to Napa Valley, designer clothes, a new car for Derek, spa days, concert tickets, shopping sprees, all posted during the same months when thousands of dollars were being transferred from my account for emergencies. Their emergency, apparently, was maintaining a lifestyle they couldn't afford. But I still didn't have the whole picture. $47,000 was a lot of money, even for their expensive tastes. There had to be something else, something bigger. That's when I noticed something odd in Sarah's posts. Several photos from what looked like medical offices. Tommy sitting in waiting rooms, looking tired and pale. Captions like, "Another doctor's appointment for our brave boy," and praying for answers about Tommy's health. Tommy's health? What was wrong with Tommy? I scrolled back through months of posts, looking for any mention of my grandson being sick. And there it was, a gradual narrative building over the past year. Posts about Tommy being tired all the time, about behavioral issues, about seeking answers from specialists. But here's what bothered me. I'd spent countless hours with Tommy over his 8 years of life. He was energetic, curious, sometimes stubborn, a normal, healthy, happy child. When had he become this tired, pale boy in Sarah's photos? And why hadn't anyone told me he was sick? I picked up my phone and called Sarah, for the first time in a week. "Mom!" She sounded surprised but pleased. "How are you? We've been worried about you." "I'm fine, honey. I was actually calling about Tommy. I saw some of your posts about doctor appointments. Is he okay?" There was a pause. A long pause. "Oh, Mom, it's been so stressful. Tommy's been having some issues, behavioral problems, attention difficulties. We've been seeing specialists, trying to figure out what's wrong." "What kind of specialists?" "Psychiatrists, mostly. They think he might have ADHD, maybe some anxiety issues. It's been really expensive, all these appointments and tests." Expensive. There was that word again. "Well, I'd love to see him. Maybe I could take him for ice cream this weekend?" "Oh, Mom, that's so sweet. But Tommy's been having a rough time lately. His doctors think it's best if he keeps to his routine right now. Maybe when he's feeling better?" His doctors, routine, when he's feeling better. What kind of treatment is he getting? Medication, mostly. To help with his focus and anxiety. It makes him pretty tired, so he's been resting a lot. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the financial records spread across my table. $47,000 in medical assistance. A grandson I barely got to see anymore. A daughter who was suddenly very interested in my continued financial support. And a growing suspicion that something was very, very wrong. But I needed more information. I needed to understand exactly what was happening to Tommy and why it was costing so much money. Because if there's one thing I learned in 40 years of library work, it's that when the story doesn't add up, you keep digging until you find the truth. And I had a feeling the truth was going to be worse than I imagined. The next piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source, my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. I was checking my mailbox Thursday morning when she walked over with that look people get when they want to tell you something but aren't sure they should. You know the look, eyebrows slightly raised, mouth set in a line that says, "I probably shouldn't say this, but..." "Eleanor," she said, glancing around like she was sharing state secrets, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything okay with your family situation?" Mrs. Chen had lived next door for 15 years. We'd shared countless conversations over the fence, borrowed cups of sugar, watched each other's houses during vacations. She knew me well enough to recognize when something was off. "What do you mean, Linda?" "Well, it's just..." She looked around again, then stepped closer. "Sarah was here last week asking about your house. She wanted to know if I'd noticed any maintenance issues or if I thought you were having trouble keeping up with things." My blood went cold. "What kind of questions?" "She asked if I'd seen you forgetting to bring in your garbage cans, or leaving lights on all night, or if your yard was looking neglected. She seemed very concerned about whether you were capable of living alone." The words hit me like a physical blow. Sarah had been questioning my neighbors about my competency, building a case, gathering evidence. "She also asked about your driving," Mrs. Chen continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Whether I'd noticed you seeming confused or disoriented, whether you'd had any accidents or close calls. What did you tell her? Mrs. Chen's expression hardened. I told her your house is immaculate and you're sharper than people half your age. I told her you're the most organized person I know and that if anyone in this neighborhood has their act together, it's you. I felt a rush of gratitude for this woman who barely knew me but had defended me anyway. But Eleanor, she continued, she kept pressing. She asked if I'd be willing to write a letter about my concerns for your well-being. She said it would help the family make sure you got the support you needed. A letter about concerns for my well-being. Documentation that I was declining, that I couldn't take care of myself, that I needed more help than I was getting. Did you write the letter? Of course not. But Eleanor, it felt like she was building a case for something. I thought you should know. After Mrs. Chen left, I sat on my porch and thought about what she'd told me. Sarah wasn't just taking my money. She was documenting reasons why she should have more control over my life. She was creating a narrative of decline, of confusion, of incompetence. But why? What was the end game here? I went inside and called my doctor's office. Hi, this is Eleanor Patterson. I'd like to schedule my annual physical. Of course, Mrs. Patterson. Doctor, Martinez has an opening next Thursday at 2 o'clock. Perfect. And could you tell me, has anyone else called asking about my medical records or mental state recently? There was a pause. Well, your daughter called last month asking about cognitive assessments. She was concerned about your memory and wanted to know about our procedures for evaluating mental competency. Mental competency evaluations. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was terrifying. Sarah wasn't just stealing my money. She was building a case to have me declared incompetent. Once that happened, she wouldn't need to sneak around with power of attorney. She'd have complete control over my finances, my property, my life, and I'd have no legal recourse. But there was something else bothering me, something about the timeline that didn't quite fit. I pulled out my calendar and started marking dates. When had the financial transfers started? When had Sarah begun asking neighbors about my competency? When had Tommy supposedly started having health problems? The pattern that emerged was chilling. The first medical assistance transfer had happened 3 days after Sarah called my doctor asking about competency evaluations. The first emergency fund transfer had happened the same week she'd questioned Mrs. Chen about my ability to live alone. It wasn't random. It was coordinated, systematic, professional. But there was still something missing, something about Tommy that didn't add up. I decided to do something I hadn't done in months. I drove to Tommy's school. Riverside Academy was a small private school with a close-knit community. I'd been to countless events there over the years. Holiday concerts, science fairs, parent-teacher conferences back when I was still considered part of Tommy's support system. I walked into the main office with my grandmother's smile firmly in place. Mrs. Patterson, the secretary, Mrs. Rodriguez, looked genuinely pleased to see me. How lovely. Are you here for Tommy? Actually, I was hoping to speak with his teacher. I'm concerned about some health issues he's been having, and I wanted to understand how they're affecting his schoolwork. Mrs. Rodriguez's expression changed slightly. Oh, yes. Poor Tommy has been having such a difficult time lately. Mrs. Morrison has been very worried about him. Could I speak with her? She's in class right now, but she has a planning period in 20 minutes. Would you like to wait? I waited in the hallway, watching children walk by with their backpacks and lunchboxes, their faces bright with the energy that should belong to every 8-year-old, including my grandson. Mrs. Morrison appeared exactly 20 minutes later. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the patient demeanor that comes from years of working with children. Mrs. Patterson, what a wonderful surprise. How are you? I'm well, thank you. I was hoping we could talk about Tommy. I understand he's been having some health issues? Her expression grew concerned. Yes, it's been quite worrying. He's been missing a lot of school lately. Sarah calls in sick for him quite frequently. And when he is here, he seems different. Different how? Tired, distracted. He falls asleep in class sometimes, which is very unusual for Tommy. He used to be one of my most energetic students. And there have been a few incidents where he's seemed almost drugged. The word hit me like a physical blow. Drugged? I probably shouldn't say that, Mrs. Morrison said quickly. But there was one day last month where he was so lethargic we couldn't wake him up easily. The school nurse was very concerned. We called Sarah, and she said he'd had a reaction to his new medication. What kind of medication? She said it was for ADHD and anxiety. But Mrs. Patterson, I've been teaching for 25 years. I know what children on ADHD medication look like, and this wasn't that. Tommy seemed heavily sedated. My hands were shaking. Has anyone from the family mentioned what doctors he's seeing? What kind of treatment he's getting? Mrs. Morrison looked around, then leaned closer. This is probably inappropriate for me to say, but there have been some concerns among the staff. Tommy has mentioned special medicine that makes him sleepy, and he's asked to call his grandmother several times when he's not feeling well. He talks about you constantly, you know. He misses you terribly. He misses me. My grandson, who I barely get to see anymore, has been asking for me when he's sick. Mrs. Morrison, if you had concerns about a child's welfare, what would you do? We're mandated reporters, Mrs. Patterson. If we suspected abuse or neglect, we'd have to contact Child Protective Services. But so far, we've only had concerns, not concrete evidence. I thanked Mrs. Morrison and walked back to my car on shaking legs. The pieces were finally coming together, and the picture they formed was more horrifying than I'd imagined. They weren't just stealing my money for their lifestyle. They were using my grandson as part of their scheme. Whatever they were doing to Tommy, it was making him sick. And they were using his supposed illness to justify the thousands of dollars in medical assistance they were taking from my accounts. But I still didn't know exactly what they were doing to him, or why. I sat in my car outside Tommy's school and made a decision. This wasn't just about my money anymore. This was about protecting my grandson. And I was going to find out exactly what they were doing to him, no matter what it took. Because if there's one thing that will turn a quiet librarian into a dangerous enemy, it's threatening a child she loves. The real investigation was about to begin. That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I became a digital stalker. Not in a creepy way, in a librarian way. There's a difference. Librarians don't stalk. We research. We investigate. We follow information trails until we find the truth. And I had a feeling that the truth about what was happening to Tommy was hidden somewhere in the digital footprints my daughter and son-in-law had been leaving. I started with what I could access legally and ethically. Public records, social media posts, anything that was freely available online. Derek's LinkedIn profile showed he'd been unemployed for 6 months. Not the temporary setback Sarah had mentioned, but a full 6 months without income. His last job had been at a medical billing company. Interesting detail that I filed away for later. Sarah's Facebook posts told a different story than the one she'd been sharing with me. Yes, there were posts about Tommy's health struggles, but they were interspersed with photos of expensive dinners, new clothes, spa days, and weekend trips. But it was the timing that caught my attention. Every expensive purchase or luxury experience was posted within days of a large medical assistance transfer from my account. March 15th, $3,200 transfer for medical assistance. March 17th, Sarah posts photos from an expensive spa weekend. April 3rd, $2,500 transfer for emergency fund. April 5th, Derek posts photos of his new golf clubs. The pattern was consistent and damning. But I needed more information about Tommy's supposed medical treatment. If they were using his health as justification for taking my money, there should be a paper trail. That's when I remembered something from my library days. Insurance companies keep detailed records of all claims and payments. And as Tommy's grandmother and secondary beneficiary on his policy, I had a right to request information about his medical care. I called Derek's insurance company the next morning. Hi, this is Eleanor Patterson. I'm the secondary beneficiary on a policy for my grandson, Tommy Patterson Williams. I'd like to request a summary of medical claims for the past year. Of course, Mrs. Patterson. Let me pull up that account. Can you verify the policy number and your relationship to the insured? I provided the information I'd gathered from old insurance cards I'd found in my files. Perfect. I can mail you a summary of all claims filed in the past 12 months. Is your address still on Elm Street? Yes, that's correct. You should receive that within 5 to 7 business days. While I waited for the insurance records, I decided to dig deeper into Derek's employment history. Something about his background in medical billing was nagging at me. I spent hours online following digital breadcrumbs. Derek had worked for 3 different medical billing companies in the past 5 years. Each job had lasted less than 2 years. For someone supposedly skilled in the field, that seemed like a lot of job hopping. But it was the reviews and complaints I found that really caught my attention. One former employer had posted a vague but concerning review on a professional networking site. Derek showed initial promise, but displayed concerning ethical flexibility regarding billing practices. Would not recommend for positions requiring financial integrity. Ethical flexibility regarding billing practices. That was corporate speak for, we think he was stealing, but we can't prove it. Another company had a Better Business Bureau complaint that mentioned irregularities in medical billing during the time Derek worked there. The complaint had been resolved, but the timing was suspicious. I was starting to see a pattern. Derek had experience in medical billing, a history of questionable ethics, and a current need for money. Sarah had power of attorney over my finances and was systematically draining my accounts using medical expenses as justification. And Tommy, my sweet grandson, was somehow at the center of it all. The insurance records arrived on a Wednesday. I opened the envelope with trembling hands, not sure what I was going to find. What I discovered made me physically sick. Over the past year, Tommy's insurance had paid out over $60,000 in medical claims. $60,000 for an 8-year-old child. The claims were for psychiatric evaluations, behavioral therapy, medication management, and something called intensive outpatient treatment. The doctors listed were specialists I'd never heard of, at clinics I'd never seen mentioned in Sarah's social media posts. But here's what really bothered me. As Tommy's grandmother and secondary beneficiary, I should have been receiving copies of all these claims. I'd never seen any of them. I called the insurance company back. Hi, this is Eleanor Patterson again. I received the claims summary for Tommy Patterson Williams, and I have some questions. Of course. How can I help you? I'm listed as the secondary beneficiary, but I've never received copies of these claims. Is there a reason for that? Let me check the account settings. It looks like all correspondence has been directed to go only to the primary policyholder, Derek Patterson Williams. That's unusual for a secondary beneficiary arrangement, but it's what's on file. Could you tell me more about these psychiatric claims? The amounts seem very high for a child. I can't discuss specific medical details, but I can tell you that the claims have all been processed and paid according to the policy terms. If you have concerns about the medical care, you might want to speak with the treating physicians. After I hung up, I stared at the claims summary for a long time. $60,000 in psychiatric treatment for a child who, until recently, had been perfectly healthy and happy. Either Tommy had developed serious mental health issues that no one had told me about, or something else was going on. I decided to find out which doctors were supposedly treating my grandson. The first clinic listed on the claims was Riverside Behavioral Health. I'd never heard of it, despite living in this area for 35 years. I looked it up online. The address led to a strip mall on the other side of town. According to Google Street View, the building housed a nail salon, a tax preparation service, and a vacant storefront. No behavioral health clinic. The second clinic, Children's Psychiatric Associates, had an address that didn't exist. The street number was higher than any building on that road. The third clinic had a real address, but when I called the number listed, I got a disconnected message. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. The clinics were fake. The doctors were fake. The treatments were fake. But the insurance payments were very, very real. Derek was using his medical billing experience to file fraudulent insurance claims for Tommy's non-existent psychiatric treatment. Sarah was using her power of attorney to steal money from me to supplement their income while they built their fraud operation. And Tommy? What were they doing to my grandson to make this scheme work? Because insurance companies don't just pay claims without evidence. There had to be medical records, treatment notes, something to justify $60,000 in psychiatric care, which meant they were doing something to Tommy to create the symptoms that would support their fraudulent claims. I picked up my phone and called Detective Rodriguez at the local police station. "I need to report child abuse and insurance fraud," I told the officer who answered. "Let me transfer you to Detective Rodriguez. He handles those types of cases." As I waited for the transfer, I thought about my sweet grandson, about how tired he'd looked in Sarah's photos, about how his teacher said he seemed drugged, about how he'd been asking for his grandmother when he felt sick. They were poisoning my grandson to steal money from insurance companies and from me, and I was going to make sure they paid for every single thing they'd done to him. Detective Rodriguez was a patient man with kind eyes and the demeanor of someone who'd seen too much but still cared deeply about justice. He listened to my story without interruption, taking notes as I laid out the financial evidence, the fake medical claims, and my growing concerns about Tommy's welfare. "Mrs. Patterson, these are serious allegations. Insurance fraud is a federal crime, and if there's child abuse involved..." He shook his head. "We'll need to investigate thoroughly before we can take action. In the meantime, I need you to not let them know you're aware of what's happening. Can you do that? How long will the investigation take? A few weeks, maybe a month. We need to verify the medical records, interview the supposed doctors, check the insurance claims. And we'll need to get Tommy examined by an independent physician. A month. Tommy would be subjected to whatever they were doing to him for another month while they built their case. Detective, what if I could get them to confess? What if I could get them to admit what they're doing? Mrs. Patterson, I can't advise you to confront them. It could be dangerous, and it might compromise our investigation. But if I happen to record a conversation where they admitted to the fraud..." Detective Rodriguez looked at me for a long moment. "If such a recording existed, and it was obtained legally, it would certainly be helpful to our case. But please be careful. People who commit fraud on this scale, they don't usually stop at financial crimes." I understood the subtext. He couldn't tell me to do it, but he wouldn't stop me if I did. But first, I needed to understand exactly what they were doing to Tommy. I needed proof of the abuse, not just the fraud. That's when I made a decision that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. I was going to break into their house. I know how that sounds. A 70-year-old librarian planning a break-in. But I still had a key from when I used to water their plants during vacations. They'd never asked for it back, probably forgot I had it. And if Tommy was being abused, I needed evidence that would hold up in court. I spent 2 days watching their routine. Sarah dropped Tommy at school at 8:15, then went to her part-time job at the dental office. Derek left for his job interviews around 9. That gave me a window from 9 to 3 when the house would be empty. On Friday morning, I parked 3 blocks away and walked to their house. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the front door, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was about Tommy. This was about saving my grandson. The house was quiet. I went straight to Tommy's room. What I found there broke my heart and confirmed my worst fears. On his nightstand was a pill organizer, the kind used for complex medication regimens. I opened it. Monday through Sunday, morning and evening doses. Each compartment contained 2 different pills. I took photos with my phone, then carefully removed 1 pill from each type. I'd have them identified later. In Tommy's desk drawer, I found something even more disturbing. A folder labeled Medical Records. Inside were documents I'd never seen before. Psychiatric evaluations, behavioral assessments, prescription records. According to these documents, Tommy had been diagnosed with severe ADHD, anxiety disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, and something called pediatric bipolar disorder. The medications prescribed were powerful: stimulants, anti-anxiety drugs, mood stabilizers, antipsychotics. But here's what didn't make sense. I'd spent countless hours with Tommy over his 8 years of life. He was energetic, yes, but not hyperactive. He was curious and sometimes stubborn, but not defiant or oppositional. He was a normal, healthy, happy child. Or he had been, until recently. I photographed every document, then moved to Sarah's home office. If they were running a medical fraud operation, there would be more evidence here. What I found in her filing cabinet made me physically sick. Insurance claims, dozens of them. Claims for Tommy's ongoing psychiatric treatment, his specialized therapy sessions, his emergency medical interventions, his residential treatment consultations. Each claim was for hundreds or thousands of dollars. But I knew these treatments had never happened. Tommy had never been to residential treatment. He'd never had emergency medical interventions. The therapy sessions were fictional. I kept digging. In the back of the filing cabinet, I found a folder that made everything clear. Tommy's college fund was written on the tab. Inside were bank statements for an account I'd never heard of, an account that had received over $80,000 in the past year. $80,000 from insurance reimbursements for Tommy's medical treatment. But the most damning evidence was in Derek's desk. A folder labeled Business Records contained what looked like a how-to guide for medical billing fraud. There were templates for creating fake medical records, lists of diagnostic codes that generated the highest insurance payouts, and contact information for what appeared to be a network of people involved in similar schemes. At the bottom of the folder was a handwritten note that made my blood run cold. T's symptoms need to be more consistent. Increase evening dose. Make sure he's lethargic for school visits. Document everything for next claim cycle. They were systematically drugging my grandson to create symptoms that would justify their fraudulent insurance claims. They were poisoning an 8-year-old child for money. I photographed everything, put the documents back exactly as I'd found them, and left the house. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, crying and shaking and trying to process what I'd discovered. Then I drove straight back to the police station. "Detective Rodriguez, I have evidence," I said, showing him the photos on my phone. He looked through them with growing alarm. "Mrs. Patterson, this is worse than we thought. This isn't just insurance fraud. This is systematic child abuse. We need to get Tommy away from them immediately." "How?" "I'm calling Child Protective Services right now, and I'm getting a warrant for their arrest. But Mrs. Patterson, I need you to promise me you won't confront them. This is dangerous. People who would drug their own child for money. There's no telling what they might do if they feel cornered." I promised, but I was lying. Because I'd already decided what I was going to do next. I was going to get them to confess. I was going to record every word. And I was going to make sure they faced consequences for every single thing they'd done to my grandson. But first, I needed to save Tommy. And I had a plan for that too. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called Sarah and asked to see Tommy. "Hi, honey. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I'm concerned about Tommy's health issues. Could I take him for ice cream this afternoon? I feel like I haven't seen him in forever." There was a pause. "Oh, Mom, that's so sweet, but Tommy's been having a really rough day. His medication makes him pretty tired on weekends. What if I just came over for a few minutes? I have something for him." "Actually, Mom, we're dealing with some insurance issues right now. The claims for Tommy's treatment have been complicated. We might need to ask for your help with some of the medical expenses." There it was, the real reason for her sudden willingness to talk. "What kind of help?" "Well, the insurance company is being difficult about covering all of Tommy's treatments. We might need to pay some of the costs out of pocket and get reimbursed later. It's just temporary until we sort out the coverage issues." "How much are we talking about?" "Maybe $10,000 or $15,000, just to cover the gap while we fight with the insurance company. $10,000 or $15,000. On top of the $47,000 they'd already stolen from me." "Sarah, that's a lot of money. What exactly are these treatments costing?" "Oh, Mom, it's so complicated. Tommy needs specialized care, and these psychiatrists are expensive. But Derek knows all about medical billing, so he's been helping us navigate the system." Derek knows all about medical billing. She was practically admitting to the fraud. "Well, I'd like to understand what I'm paying for. Could I meet with Tommy's doctors? See his treatment plan?" Another pause. That might be difficult. Patient privacy laws, you know. And Tommy gets upset when too many people are involved in his medical care. "I'm his grandmother, Sarah. I think I have a right to know what's wrong with him." "Of course you do. It's just The doctors think it's best to keep his support system small right now. Too much stimulation can trigger his episodes. Episodes? What episodes? Sarah, I'm going to be honest with you. I've been reviewing my financial records, and I'm concerned about how much money has been transferred out of my accounts. I need to understand exactly what these medical expenses are for. The silence stretched so long, I thought she might have hung up. Mom, are you questioning whether Tommy really needs treatment? I'm questioning why I'm paying for treatment I know nothing about for a grandson I'm not allowed to see. Mom, you're starting to sound confused again. Maybe we should talk about this in person. Could you come over tonight? Derek and I would like to discuss Tommy's care with you. Confused again. There was that word. The word they used to dismiss my concerns and justify their control over my life. I'll be there at 7, I said. After I hung up, I called Detective Rodriguez. I'm going to confront them tonight. I'll have my phone recording the entire conversation. Mrs. Patterson, I strongly advise against this. We're still gathering evidence for the warrants. Detective, my grandson is being poisoned. I can't wait for warrants. If you're determined to do this, at least let us know when you're going in. We'll have units nearby in case something goes wrong. I agreed, but I knew I was on my own. This was between me and the people who had betrayed my trust and abused my grandson. Before I left for Sarah's house, I did one more thing. I called my attorney and left a detailed voicemail explaining everything I'd discovered. If something happened to me, I wanted someone to know the truth. Then I checked my phone's recording app, put on my best grandmother smile, and drove to what I knew would be the most important confrontation of my life. I parked in their driveway at exactly 7 o'clock. Derek answered the door with his usual fake smile, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Hi, Mom. Come on in. Sarah's just putting Tommy to bed. I'd like to see him first. Oh, he's already asleep. The medication makes him drowsy in the evenings, but we can talk about his treatment plan. Sarah and I have been doing a lot of research. I walked into their living room and sat down on the couch. The same couch I'd helped them pick out 2 years ago, back when I thought Derek was a good man who loved my daughter. Where is Tommy? I'd really like to see him. He's upstairs, but Mom, he's been having a difficult day. His psychiatrist thinks it's best if he's not overstimulated right now. What psychiatrist? What's his name? Derek's smile faltered slightly. Dr. Williams. He's a specialist in pediatric behavioral disorders. Where is his office? Downtown, near the medical district. Sarah came downstairs, looking nervous. Hi, Mom. Thanks for coming over. We really need to talk. I pulled out my phone and set it on the coffee table. Yes, we do. I want to talk about the $47,000 you've stolen from me. I want to talk about the fake medical claims you've been filing. And I want to talk about what you're doing to Tommy. The color drained from both their faces. Mom, I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah said, but her voice was shaking. Really? You don't know about the transfers from my account labeled family support? You don't know about the insurance claims for treatments that never happened? You don't know about the medications you're giving Tommy for conditions he doesn't have? Derek stood up. I think you should leave. Sit down, Derek. I used the voice I'd perfected during 40 years of dealing with difficult library patrons. Firm, but not aggressive. We're going to have this conversation. He sat. I know everything, I continued. I know about the fake medical licenses. I know about the fictional clinics. I know about the college fund that's really your personal bank account. I know you've been drugging my grandson to create symptoms that justify your insurance fraud. Sarah started crying. Mom, you don't understand. We were in debt. Derek lost his job, and we were going to lose the house. We just needed some help to get back on our feet. So you decided to poison your own son? We're not poisoning him, Derek snapped. The medications are harmless. They just make him sleepy and a little unfocused. It's not permanent. Harmless? I stood up, fury coursing through me. You're giving psychiatric medications to a healthy 8-year-old child. Do you have any idea what that could do to his developing brain? It's temporary, Sarah sobbed. Once we get enough money saved up, we'll stop everything. Tommy will be fine. How much is enough, Sarah? You've already stolen $80,000 from insurance companies and $47,000 from me. How much more do you need? Derek's expression changed. Gone was the fake charm, replaced by something cold and calculating. How do you know about the insurance money? I know everything, Derek. I know about the fake doctors, the fictional clinics, the false claims. I know about your business meetings with people carrying briefcases. I know about your network of fraud contacts. You've been spying on us, he said quietly. I've been protecting my grandson. Mom, Sarah said, wiping her eyes. You can't tell anyone about this. If you report us, Tommy will be taken away. He'll go into foster care. Is that what you want? What I want is for you to stop drugging him. What I want is for you to get him real medical care to undo whatever damage you've done. What I want is for you to turn yourselves in before this gets worse. Derek laughed. A cold, bitter sound. Turn ourselves in? Mom, you don't understand how this works. We're not just filing false claims. We're part of a network. There are people involved who don't take kindly to loose ends. What kind of network? The kind that makes $80,000 look like pocket change, he said. The kind that has connections in hospitals, insurance companies, government agencies. The kind that makes problems disappear. Sarah grabbed his arm. Derek, stop. But he was on a roll now, his mask completely off. You think this was our idea? You think we came up with this scheme on our own? We're small fish, Mom. Very small fish. And if you threaten to expose this operation, you won't just be threatening us. Are you threatening me, Derek? I'm warning you. Walk away. Pretend you never found out about any of this. Keep taking your allowance from your own money and stay out of our business. And Tommy? Tommy is fine. He's part of the family business now. He'll be taken care of. The family business of child abuse and fraud? Derek stood up again, and this time his posture was menacing. The family business of survival. And if you can't understand that, maybe you really are as confused as we've been telling people. That's when I knew I had everything I needed. They'd confessed to the fraud, admitted to drugging Tommy, threatened me, and revealed the existence of a larger criminal network. All recorded on my phone. You're right, Derek. I am confused about one thing. What's that? I'm confused about how my daughter could marry someone who would poison her own child for money. I'm confused about how the little girl I raised could become someone who values money more than her son's health. And I'm confused about how you thought you could steal from me and get away with it. I picked up my phone. But I'm not confused about what happens next. Sarah's eyes widened. Mom, what are you doing? I'm calling the police. And then I'm calling Child Protective Services. And then I'm calling the FBI because insurance fraud on this scale is a federal crime. Derek lunged for my phone, but I was already moving toward the door. You can't do this, Sarah screamed. He's my son. He's my grandson, I said, and I'm going to save him. I made it to my car before Derek caught up with me. He grabbed my arm as I was getting in. Give me the phone, Mom. Let go of me, Derek. Give me the phone, or I'll tell everyone you're having a mental breakdown. I'll have you committed. I'll make sure you never see Tommy again. I looked at this man who had married my daughter, who had helped poison my grandson, who had stolen my money and threatened my freedom. Derek, I said calmly, you made one crucial mistake. What's that? You underestimated a librarian. I got in my car and drove away, leaving him standing in the driveway. 20 minutes later, I was at the police station, handing over my phone with a complete recorded confession. The nightmare was almost over, but the real work was just beginning. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind that I'll remember for the rest of my life. Detective Rodriguez and his team moved with the efficiency of people who'd been waiting for exactly this kind of evidence. Within hours of hearing the recorded confession, they had warrants for Sarah and Derek's house, their bank accounts, their computers, and their phones. What they found exceeded even my worst fears. The fraud network Derek had mentioned was real and extensive. Sarah and Derek were part of a sophisticated operation that had been running for over 3 years, involving dozens of families across multiple states. They were recruiting parents to drug their children and file false insurance claims, taking a percentage of the fraudulent reimburse. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind that I'll remember for the rest of my life. Detective Rodriguez and his team moved with the efficiency of people who'd been waiting for exactly this kind of evidence. Within hours of hearing the recorded confession, they had warrants for Sarah and Derek's house, their bank accounts, their computers, and their phones. What they found exceeded even my worst fears. The fraud network Derek had mentioned was real and extensive. Sarah and Derek were part of a sophisticated operation that had been running for over 3 years, involving dozens of families across multiple states. They were recruiting parents to drug their children and file false insurance claims, taking a percentage of the fraudulent reimbursements. Tommy wasn't their only victim. They had been managing 4 other children, all between the ages of 6 and 10, all being given unnecessary psychiatric medications to create billable symptoms. The total fraud amount was over $2 million. But the most important discovery was Tommy himself. Child Protective Services removed him from the house on Wednesday morning. I'll never forget the phone call from Detective Rodriguez. "Mrs. Patterson, we have Tommy. He's safe. We're taking him to Children's Hospital for a complete medical evaluation." I cried. Right there on the phone, I cried with relief and rage and overwhelming gratitude that my grandson was finally safe. Dr. Sarah Kim, the pediatrician who examined him, called me that evening with an update that broke my heart and filled me with hope at the same time. "Mrs. Patterson, I wanted to update you on Tommy's condition. The good news is that the medications he was given, while completely inappropriate, don't appear to have caused permanent damage. The bad news is that he's been heavily sedated for months. It's going to take time for his system to clear and for him to feel like himself again." "How long?" "A few weeks for the physical effects, longer for the psychological impact. He's been told he was sick when he wasn't. He's been made to feel weak and confused when he's actually a bright, healthy child. That kind of gaslighting can have lasting effects." "Can I see him?" "Actually, he's been asking for you constantly. He keeps saying he wants to go home with Grandma. Mrs. Patterson, I think you should know. When we asked him who he trusted most in the world, he said your name immediately." My heart broke and healed at the same time. "Dr. Kim, what do I need to do to get custody of him?" "CPS is already working on that. Given your relationship with Tommy, the fact that you're the one who exposed the abuse, and your obvious love for him, they're expediting the process. You should be able to take him home by the weekend." Friday afternoon, I walked into the hospital room where Tommy was staying. He was sitting up in bed, coloring in a book, and when he saw me, his face lit up with the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in months. "Grandma!" I hugged him carefully, mindful of the IV in his arm that was helping flush the medications from his system. "Hi, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Better. The doctors here are nice. They don't give me the sleepy medicine." "You don't need any medicine, Tommy. You're perfectly healthy." "I know. Mom and Dad told me I was sick, but I never felt sick, just tired all the time, and confused, like my brain was full of cotton." We talked for an hour. He told me about the special medicine that made him feel foggy and confused. He told me about missing school because he was too sleepy to get up. He told me about wanting to call me when he felt scared, but being told I was too confused to help him. "Grandma, why did Mom and Dad lie to me? How do you explain to an 8-year-old that his parents were using him to commit crimes? How do you help a child understand that the people who were supposed to protect him were the ones hurting him?" "Sometimes adults make very bad choices, sweetheart. Your mom and dad made some bad choices, and now they have to face the consequences. But you're safe now, and you're going to come live with me. Forever? For as long as you want to." "I want to forever. I missed you so much, Grandma. I kept asking to call you, but they said you were sick and couldn't help me." "I'm not sick, Tommy. I'm perfectly fine, and I'm never going to let anyone hurt you again." Saturday morning, I brought Tommy home. My home, which was now officially his home, too. The first thing he did was run around the backyard, laughing and playing like a normal 8-year-old. The medications were finally out of his system, and he was discovering what it felt like to have energy again. "Grandma, I can think clearly. My brain doesn't feel fuzzy anymore, and I'm not tired all the time." We spent the weekend redoing the spare bedroom to make it his. We went shopping for clothes and toys and books. We visited the library where I used to work, and Tommy checked out a stack of books about dinosaurs and space exploration. "I want to be a paleontologist," he announced. "Or maybe an astronaut, or maybe both." "You can be anything you want, sweetheart." The legal proceedings moved forward with surprising speed. Sarah and Derek were arrested and charged with child abuse, insurance fraud, conspiracy, theft, and racketeering. They were also facing federal charges for their role in the larger fraud network. The evidence was overwhelming. The recorded confession, the fraudulent medical records, the fake clinics, the systematic drugging of children. It painted a picture of calculated cruelty that shocked even experienced prosecutors. Sarah called me from jail 2 weeks after her arrest. "Mom, please, I know what we did was wrong, but I'm still Tommy's mother. Don't take him away from me forever." "Sarah, you poisoned your own child for money. You stole from me, lied to me, and threatened me. You lost the right to call yourself Tommy's mother the day you decided he was worth more to you as a victim than as a son. I was desperate. We were going to lose everything. So you decided to sacrifice your child to save your lifestyle. That's not desperation, Sarah. That's evil." She was crying. "Can I at least see him? Can I explain? Tommy doesn't want to see you. He's afraid of you. Do you understand that? Your own son is afraid of you because of what you did to him." "Mom, please." I hung up. 3 months later, the custody hearing made it official. I was Tommy's legal guardian. Sarah and Derek had both pled guilty to multiple charges and were sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The judge called their crimes a betrayal of the most fundamental trust between parent and child. The insurance companies recovered most of their money from seized assets, but the $47,000 stolen from me was gone, spent on their lifestyle and legal fees. I didn't care about the money. I had something much more valuable: my grandson, healthy and happy and safe. 6 months after that terrible night when I confronted them, Tommy and I had settled into a routine that felt like the most natural thing in the world. Every morning, he'd wake up energetic and clear-headed, ready to tackle whatever the day brought. No more sleepy medicine, no more confusion, no more being told he was sick when he was perfectly healthy. We'd have breakfast together, and he'd tell me about his dreams, usually involving dinosaurs or spaceships or both. Then I'd drive him to his new school where his teacher, Mrs. Anderson, marveled at his intelligence and curiosity. "Mrs. Patterson," she told me during our first parent-teacher conference, "Tommy is one of the brightest children I've ever taught. His reading level is years ahead of his grade, and his questions about science are incredibly sophisticated. Whatever you're doing at home, keep it up." What I was doing at home was simple. I was treating him like the intelligent, capable child he'd always been. I was answering his questions, encouraging his curiosity, and never, ever making him feel like there was something wrong with him. One evening, we were sitting on the porch reading together. He was working his way through a book about ancient Egypt, occasionally asking me questions about hieroglyphics and pyramids. "Grandma," he said suddenly, "I'm glad you saved me." "I'm glad I could, sweetheart." "How did you know what they were doing?" "Because I'm a librarian, Tommy. And librarians are very good at finding the truth, even when people try to hide it." He thought about that for a moment. "Maybe I'll be a librarian too. A librarian who's also a paleontologist and an astronaut." "That sounds perfect." As I watched him read, I thought about the past year, about how close I'd come to losing him, about how easy it would have been to accept their narrative that I was confused, that I needed help, that I should be grateful for their attention. But I'd trusted my instincts. I'd used my skills. I'd fought for what mattered most. And I'd won. The fraud network that Sarah and Derek had been part of was completely dismantled. 17 adults were arrested across 6 states. 23 children were removed from abusive situations and placed with loving relatives or foster families. Detective Rodriguez told me that my recorded confession had been the key piece of evidence that broke the entire operation open. "Mrs. Patterson, you should know that your courage saved a lot of children. Not just Tommy, but kids across the country who were being used the same way. I received letters from some of the other families, grandparents and aunts and uncles who had taken in children rescued from the fraud network. We'd formed an unlikely support group, bonded by our shared experience of fighting for the children we loved. Tommy thrived in ways that amazed everyone who knew his story. His energy returned completely. His natural curiosity blossomed. His grades were excellent. He made friends easily and played with the enthusiasm of a child who was finally free to be himself. But perhaps most importantly, he learned to trust again. It took time. There were nights when he'd wake up worried that someone was going to make him take sleepy medicine again. There were moments when he'd ask if I was really his grandmother or if I was going to send him away. But gradually, as the months passed, he began to understand that he was safe, that he was loved, that he was exactly the wonderful, healthy, intelligent child he'd always been. 1 year after I brought him home, Tommy had his 9th birthday party. We invited his new friends from school, Mrs. Anderson, Detective Rodriguez, Dr. Kim, and several of the families from our support group. As I watched him blow out his candles, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about him, I thought about how different this birthday was from the one I'd missed the year before. This time, Tommy was fully present, alert, happy, engaged. This time, he was surrounded by people who saw him as a child to be celebrated, not a victim to be exploited. This time, his grandmother was there to witness his joy. "What did you wish for?" I asked him after he'd blown out all 9 candles. "I wished that every kid who's being hurt like I was gets a grandma like you to save them," he said. I hugged him tight, this brave, resilient, wonderful boy who had survived something no child should ever have to endure. "You know what, Tommy? I think that's a wish that might just come true. Because if there's one thing I learned from this whole experience, it's that there are more people willing to fight for children than there are people willing to hurt them. Sometimes it just takes one person, one grandmother, one teacher, one neighbor, one detective, to stand up and say, 'Enough.' Sometimes the quietest person in the room really is the most dangerous, especially when that person is fighting for someone they love." Tommy looked up from his birthday cake. "Grandma, what's for dinner?" "Whatever you want, sweetheart. We have all the time in the world." And we did. All the time in the world to heal, to grow, to build a life together. A life based on truth instead of lies, love instead of manipulation, respect instead of exploitation. A life where an 8-year-old boy could be exactly what he was meant to be, healthy, happy, and free. Hey everyone, I hope Tommy's story touched your heart the way it touched mine. If you've ever felt underestimated or taken advantage of by family members, please know that you're not alone. Your voice matters, your instincts matter, and you have more power than you think. What would you have done in Eleanor's situation? At what point would you have said enough is enough? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories help other people feel less alone. If this story gave you strength or reminded you of your own worth, a super thanks really helps keep these stories coming. Your support allows me to continue sharing these important stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things to protect the ones they love. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I share stories like this every week, stories about resilience, justice, and the power of never giving up on the people you love. Which story should I tell next? I have so many incredible submissions from listeners who've overcome impossible situations. Your suggestions in the comments help me choose what to share next. Until next time, remember, never underestimate the power of a grandmother with a library card and a mission. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.